I mentioned earlier that the folks at Judicial Watch have been responsible for really bird dogging this whole situation with emails, trying to dig up information dating back to Benghazi, Hillary Clinton's emails, and now they've gone to a federal court to try to preserve some other emails. We've got Chris Farrell joining us right now from Judicial Watch. He's the Director of Investigations and Research. Chris, how are you, sir?
Doing very well. Great to be on with you. Thank you.
Great to have you back on the show again. We appreciate that. These emails, this time you're talking about Homeland Security. What's going on there?
Well, there's an obligation under the law for the government to preserve all of its records, and it's an obligation really under a couple of different statutes. One, the Federal Records Act, which really kind of preserves the history of what the government does or doesn't do. But then also the Open Records Law, or the Freedom of Information Act, which is where people can ask the government to produce records so that you can find out what the government's doing or not doing. And so we've made sort of a science out of filing lawsuits to get records and documents so the public can understand exactly what's going on and what it's costing them.
Well, I hope that my listeners appreciate that effort, because clearly you got answers that other people couldn't get out of the Hillary Clinton situation over the. But I would think, and maybe it's just me, that in light of what happened in Hillary Clinton's case, everyone seemed to agree on one thing, that it was improper for her to use an unsecure outside email for work purposes. Effectively, that's what happened. And now you've got at the Department of Homeland Security some of the top officials doing the same thing?
Incredibly true. So at the same time that Hillary Clinton was violating national security crime laws, and they were crimes, don't let anybody fool you otherwise. The reason I say that is I'm a former special agent of Army counterintelligence. I put people in jail for less. So these were national security crimes that she and her colleagues engaged in. At the very same time, over at Homeland Security, Jay Johnson and other senior leaders at the department were giving themselves waivers to conduct business and to log on to and interact with their private email on their government computers. This is, a variation on a theme. It's essentially the same thing,
right?
That was going on with Hillary.
Do we have indications, or is it just too early to say whether any of it was a security risk?
That is question number one. I mean, any security manager within Homeland Security, should have sprang into action, saying, "Wait a minute, we need to do a damage assessment. What exactly was going on here? Who was doing what to who? How long? What accounts?" I mean, all those basic interrogatives have got to be answered. And frankly, that's part of the problem. And what's even worse is, what's really sad is we have to sue. We've got to go into court and compel these agencies to answer these questions. It's really outrageous.
Well, it is. And now, so when you go into federal court, does that happen today? Is that correct? When are you going?
Well, we actually make a filing. So we do this. I mean, for us, this is like Jiffy Lube, right? We can knock them out in 20 minutes. I mean, that's kind of a sad statement on our system, but it happens to be true. So we file a lawsuit. It gets assigned to a judge. The government gets to answer. Then there's normally a scheduling conference or hearing where the judge kind of tells the government, "Okay, listen, explain why it is that you can't produce these records." And then the government acts all embarrassed, and eventually they're compelled to produce the records according to a schedule set by the judge. That's kind of the Reader's Digest version of this whole process.
Chris, is there an urgency about this? I mean, does some of this need to take place prior to the administration changing, or will they be able to go back and seek some of this information retroactively?
Oh, it can go retroactive because there's requirements under the Federal Records Act that these records, these documents that are clearly government business, even if they have been shunted through a private email account, that they be preserved, and that's why it's so important that we got into court and legally drop the benchmark and say, look, you can't get away with this. You can't hide these records. Mrs. Clinton absconded with 60,000 plus records, we're not going to put up with it. And these records need to be made part of the National Archives as dictated by law.
Well, we will keep my listeners up to date on this as you get further along in this lawsuit. Back at the end of the year, which I sound like was a long time ago because it's only the 5th of January, you guys also reported that you're still trying to encourage the Secretary of State's office, the State Department, to recover additional Hillary Clinton emails. They just seem to have given up on that, and I'm sure that was intentional.
Well, there's a couple of different things in play here. So people know about the FBI investigation, and they certainly know about our litigation uncovering all these emails to begin with. But there's another prong on the fork here, and that is Secretary Kerry, as the sitting secretary, had an affirmative obligation under something called the Federal Records Act to go and talk to the Attorney General and say, hey, we've got a problem, and we need to go back and recreate or in some way archive and capture what's been lost. And when we asked the secretary to do that, he blew it off, and so we sued him. And so the government said, well, look, this whole issue is already being looked at by other people. Well, that's true, but it was under a different law. It was under the Freedom of Information Act. The issue we are talking about is the Federal Records Act, and they're similar. There are some degrees of overlap, but they're different, and they still have to abide by the law. And so, in that regard, they had to produce these records and preserve them. And so we lost at the district court, but we won at the appellate court, and they're going to be forced to do it.
It's maddening to me that the lack of enthusiasm on the part, it shouldn't be surprising, but it's still maddening, the lack of enthusiasm on the part of these officials to get to the bottom of this email situation. And I think back to this Huma Abedin laptop situation with Anthony Weiner. Who knows what all might have been in that file? Maybe some of Hillary Clinton's missing emails were in that file, but I haven't heard a word uttered about it since the election.
Yeah, there's a sudden case of amnesia, right?
Yeah,
Everyone said, oh, well, you don't forget. So.
That's the truth. Chris Farrell with Judicial Watch, thank you for the update, and we will be in touch.
Thank you, sir. Much
all right.
appreciated.
Thank you very much. Judicial Watch, by the way, great website, judicialwatch.org. You can go on and they do a weekly update of their investigations. Also, what they do isn't free, so if you want to show your support for what they helped us with during this election season, they've got a Donate Now button on the top of their website there, and you can feel free to go contribute. How about that?